Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me okay. I've changed so many settings on my headset to try and make that work properly that I've no idea if I'm talking to anyone now. We're about to start our first session. I'd like to welcome Jess Jordan, who's going to be talking to us about an investigation into the best practices of decolonising academic library collections. Take it away, Jess.
Great, thank you. Let me share my screen now. Firefox, share, slideshow. Okay, that should be slides up on the screen now. Great. Wow, what an opening ceremony. It's going to be a tough act to follow, right? But anyway, good morning. Thank you all for coming today. I'm so excited to be speaking to all of you lovely people as my first ever conference presentation. But as Darren said, yeah, my name is Jess Jordan. I'm currently a senior library assistant at the University of Oxford. And today I'm going to be telling you about the research I did for my master's dissertation at UCL in 2021 about the decolonisation of academic library collections in the UK particularly. So 2021, not that long ago, but already this research is potentially a little bit outdated. It took place in the immediate aftermath of COVID. Things are a bit different now. I know there's been a lot of new publications that came out just after I finished that would have been useful to have, but I believe the broad themes are still applicable. And I do have to acknowledge, first off, that I am doing decolonisation research from a place of extreme privilege. I am a white, able-bodied native English speaker, among other things. So, my perspective and experience on matters related to diversity are going to be limited. But I try my best to have empathy and not make assumptions about other people's experience. So these next two slides I'm showing you kind of just for fun. I don't expect you to read my handwriting. These are some mind maps that I made when trying to decide on a dissertation topic to try and combine my three main professional interests of collections, education, and decolonisation. And I realized that three topics is too many to combine, so I settled on decolonisation of collections and limited it further to academic libraries in the UK. So I decided to take a survey of what sort of activities are going on currently under this umbrella of decolonisation, with collections as the emphasis, because that's an interest of mine, but also because collections are one of, if not the most primary way in which students interact with the library, whether it be browsing in person, doing research, accessing e-resources, those types of things. And I intended this work to not be purely theoretical. I was hoping to come up with some practical results of making recommendations for most effective strategies for doing this work. Spoiler alert, I did not come up with any really concrete recommendations because it turns out that it's complicated and all the challenges that I discovered are sort of nebulous and hard to solve. But so that investigating effective methods leads to some sub-questions of what kind of communication and coordination is happening both between different universities and their libraries and also within the same institution, between different groups, different stakeholders. Who is participating in this work? It's centered on the library, of course, but there are many stakeholders that can be involved. The student body, most obviously, but also faculty, administration, and everyone in the world, the general public. And I wanted to identify what are the major challenges that are in place to getting this work done. I did grapple for a while with whether or not decolonisation is the right word to describe the kind of work that I wanted to investigate. I discounted or rejected the term diversity pretty quickly as not the right word to focus on because of its association with statistics and demographics, or it's more of a human resources and staffing issue, which is important, obviously, but is not quite the right focus. We also have this term that I'm sure you're all familiar with, equality, diversity, inclusion, or EDI, also diversity, equality, inclusion, also equity, diversity, inclusion, or however you want to phrase it. And this phrase is more nuanced and is starting to get more to my point of examining the structures of how institutions operate. And that was really useful, but it is a bit of a mouthful. And the fact that we cannot all agree on what exactly these abbreviations stand for is a bit of a barrier to doing research. The word decolonization comes directly from the political movement, the literal undoing of colonialism, a movement that is not at all abstract or academic. It's real and physical and sometimes violent. And many scholars argue that to use this term in a context of libraries and education is to sort of water down its political power. And I do have a lot of respect for this position, but it just has turned out that what we call the library decolonization movement has in fact evolved from issues related to more general decolonial themes, specifically the Rhodes Must Fall movement that started in South Africa in 2015. And so this word has come into general use to describe work that we're doing in academia to decenter the white experience, identify the ways that Western bias has shaped and is shaping education, and work to overcome those biases. So it is now, the word most commonly in use for the work I'm investigating. And so it was pragmatic to use that as my sort of central search term. So now we've got our research questions. It's time to do actual research. It was clear from the start that I would want to use qualitative methods for this research rather than quantitative, because simply there's not enough data for quantitative methods to be effective. Quantitative referring to quantities, things that you can easily measure, numbers, statistics. Qualitative research referring more to interpretation, experience, description. And that made sense for work that is largely related to the student and staff of academia lived experience. So this research was conducted in spring and summer of 2021. I started with a literature review, as you do, that combined both formal and informal sources. For formal library journal articles, I was easily able to search using a ProQuest library and information science collection to find out, what librarians are publishing about the work that they're doing. But I also searched a lot of informal literature, which is a lot more nebulous, and those include university websites, different blogs, lots of Twitter feeds. The hashtag CritLib, or short for critical librarianship, was really useful. And I also brushed up on traditional decolonial theory from some of the classic authors that you may be familiar with. So some things became apparent pretty quickly from the literature review, that the decolonize the library movement is fairly recent, given that it primarily emerged from Rhodes Must Fall in 2015 and then was sort of reinvigorated in 2020 following the George Floyd protests and the Black Lives Matter movements. It's a fairly informal movement with little to no central organization. There's no decolonization code of ethics yet. Maybe we can work on that. The work, I may use the word project to describe things But strictly speaking, a project is a discrete unit of work that has a beginning and an end, whereas the work that we're talking about here largely is open-ended and ongoing. Sorry. So a project might be, for instance, we have a given set of outdated subject headings that we are going to find replacements for, whereas ongoing work might be increasing the diversity of authors on our reading lists. And in this movement, there are no sort of standardized goals or metrics for evaluating success, which is proving to be a barrier of communication between and within institutions. The next phase of the research was a series of guided or semi-structured interviews. And I recruited participants through two ways. Some people I approached directly through email based on my knowledge of their work. And I also put out a call on the Just Mail decolonisation mailing list. And so I got ultimately 4 participants from 4 different universities and did interviews over Zoom in July 2021. I also planned and in fact wrote a survey that was intended for students at these same universities to gauge their awareness of and response to the work being done by the library. But that survey did not produce any results due to some timing and communication issues in getting it distributed to the students. So this was July, and I don't know if you know this, but students do not check their academic email in the summer. So this research had some obvious limitations. The first was just the time and budget constraints of a master's thesis. I just basically had 1 summer to do it. I would have ideally had much more than 4 interviews, perhaps up to 10, but this work takes a surprising amount of time. If you've never done qualitative research before, I used Zoom's auto transcription feature and then edited that text file, but at the time, this transcription was not very good. So it might have, in hindsight, been easier to start from scratch rather than trying to edit the garbled text that I received. Also, after you have a transcript, there's the coding and analysis, and this time just piles on. And I also did not have any budget to compensate my interview subjects for their time, which may have limited the pool of potential subjects. It's also just difficult to research an emerging topic that does not have a lot of formal publications about it due to the ephemeral nature of the internet. There was a lot of promising sounding informal sources like blogs and different websites that I tried to find that ended up being dead ends due to broken link or simply inactive web page. So here's a table of my participants anonymized. You can see that the student bodies they represent range from fairly small to fairly large. All these universities are located in Southern England. I did not receive any responses from UK outside of England. And you'll see I've described some of these participants as chair of DWG. That is because that stands for Decolonisation Working Group. So in 3 of these 4 libraries, the work being done under what I would describe as Decolonize the Library is organized in a more or less structured way in some kind of working group or steering committee that I have just described blanketly as Decolonisation Working Group. And these groups are centered on the library, but not necessarily exclusive to the library. So here's the meat of it, the actual work being done. And what I found is that the work that I investigated is all work that almost all libraries are doing anyway, but these particular libraries are just able to and focusing on putting a decolonial emphasis on it. So almost every academic library is going to be involved in reading list creation, but if that may be as simple as buying the books that are requested, but these libraries in particular are taking a slightly more hands-on approach to perhaps work directly with faculty and also students to address gaps they see in the curricula, perhaps encouraging the inclusion of authors from diverse backgrounds, authors outside of the traditional canon, and also to question assumptions about what sort of material belongs on a reading list in the first place. In that same vein, 3 of the libraries also have dedicated channels for students and anyone in the university, but particularly students, to make purchase requests for materials that the library should have, specifically relating to these issues of diversity, decolonization, social justice, any aspect in which they feel the collection is lacking. Most libraries are going to be running, information literacy and academic skills workshops. 3 of these libraries that I studied are doing their normal sessions, but also having some with more of a decolonial focus, such as inclusive citation, how to search for non-traditional literature. And these sessions may or may not be in the format of a standard one-shot. Some of them are more collaborative, more ongoing, may take the form of a journal club or a reading group. 3 of the libraries have established dedicated zine collections. Zines can be a great low-cost way to expand your collection of material by and about people who may have been excluded from the traditional publishing industry. And 2 of these libraries have created LibGuides on decolonial subjects, such as Introduction to Critical Race Theory or the history of the protest movement in their local area. So the good news first. The reading groups and information literacy sessions are proving to be popular. These topics of social justice and decolonization seem to be resonating with a lot of students and are being well received by faculty as well. Perhaps the one benefit to the upheaval of COVID is that the shift to online learning has made a lot of these events more accessible, and in some cases has increased attendance. The channels for students to request purchases are being well utilized, and as my participant number 2 described, in such a case where it's not utilized as well as you would hope, a very relatively small financial incentive is proved quite effective in increasing engagement. In their case, they entered every student who requested a purchase within a given month into a prize drawing for a £20 voucher, and that dramatically increased engagement. And members of the university outside the library are generally supportive. None of my participants reported any particular pushback. And in fact, some of their working groups include people from outside the library, from faculty, heads of academic departments, deans, and student group representatives. There are a number of challenges, of course, and the bulk of these challenges center around issues of communication and engagement. A purchase suggestion is a very low effort way for students to engage, but for anything more long-term, any more in-depth interventions that the library wants to run, it can be difficult to recruit student participants. It is difficult to keep the wider university informed on what the library is doing. I'm sure anyone who has been a student or worked in academia is familiar with, you're just bombarded with information nonstop. And when you're receiving so many newsletters a week, it's easy for even something that would be interesting to you to just slip through the cracks. There is always a risk of duplication of effort due to lack of communication, either between different institutions or within the same institution. There might be, say, at one university, a library decolonization working group, a student union decolonization working group, an English faculty decolonization working group that are not communicating as effectively as they could, either because they're not aware of what each other is doing, or they just simply prefer to do things their own way. And of course, COVID exacerbated all these problems. This was, summer 2021, we were still kind of in the thick of it. Remote learning, reduced opportunities for casual encounters and communication. Your students who are not on campus are not walking past your posters, are not walking past your book displays. And in general, everyone just had a bit more of their mental space taken up than we were used to. Other challenges include the perennial library issues of staffing and funding. So by and large, the library staff were taking on this work on top of their normal workload with little to no additional funding. There's also a not insignificant emotional burden to doing decolonization work, particularly if you're dealing with traumatic subjects like racism or the transatlantic slave trade. And especially if you yourself are part of a marginalized group, you may feel the pressure of having to represent or speak for your group, whether that be your race, your sexuality, what have you. And the participants that I interviewed were all aware of this risk and willing to take it on for themselves because they felt the work was important, but they were all cautious of asking this of others, of other people, particularly the students who may be quite young, maybe in a tumultuous time of their life, and just generally have a lot going on. And there is the question of the library's place within the wider university, how much influence they should have over reading lists and curriculums. Faculty are not always receptive to change. They may not appreciate the suggestion that their reading list is outdated or could do with some expansion. But it is important to have these conversations regardless, because buying the books is not useful if no one reads them. Having the materials in the library is not the goal. The goal is to incorporate these new ideas into the curriculum, into the reading list, into the student experience. So in the libraries, there are many axes of diversity that we need to be concerned with, some of which we've talked about yesterday or will today. There's things like disability, multilingualism, immigration status, what have you. But when we talk about decolonizing collections, what we're mostly talking about is issues of race and ethnicity at this time, which makes sense when you think of this movement as having evolved fairly directly from racially related movements such as Black Lives Matter and Roads Must Fall. And also, it became clear to me that the reason that a lot of this work is ongoing rather than project-based is not a coincidence. It is logical if we think of decolonizing the library or any work under that umbrella, not as the goal in itself, but as a tool that we are using to further the ultimate goal of eliminating oppression and creating a more just and equitable world. And that work is never ending. That work is ongoing. So it makes sense that the tools we use to achieve those goals are themselves open-ended. And there are also just a lot of factors that are completely outside of the library's control, not least of which is the publishing industry. As Dr. Singh pointed out yesterday, the traditional publishing excludes a lot of people. And as one of my participants humorously put it, if the books have not been published, it's very difficult to have them in the library, which is one reason why zines are so effective, because that is a much lower barrier of entry to publishing. As you may have found in any library work that you undertake, students are much more likely to engage with material that they can relate to their program of study. This applies to, any sort of programming, any sort of collection development. Even if they care deeply about a subject, they don't necessarily have the time or mental energy to devote to it unless they can come at it from different angles and relate it to multiple areas of their life. Oh, great. And so one of the ultimate challenges in decolonization work is finding a balance between the library outsourcing labor in ways such as, relying on students to make suggestions, relying on someone else's LibGuide to teach your students about critical race theory on the one hand, and on the other hand, being overly self-reliant and risking reinventing the wheel every time you have a problem because you were not able to or didn't think to communicate with other groups in your university or other libraries outside of your university. So if I had to sum up my entire research in a couple of sentences, it would be that expanding the collection is not the goal. Buying the books is not the goal. It's not useful if nobody reads the books. The goal is to incorporate these new ideas into the curriculum, into the student experience. And to do that, the library cannot act alone in a silo. It's necessary to collaborate with all of your stakeholders, students, faculty, etc. If we want to make change that is real and change that lasts and is not merely performative and ticking boxes on spreadsheets. And that is all I had prepared today. I'm glad, great, I timed it great so that we can have a couple of questions and some discussion. I would love to hear if any of you have been doing this work yourself, and if you have any ideas that you would like to share with your colleagues in this room.
That's great. Thanks, Jess. Would anyone like to raise their hand to either ask a question or share an experience or comment on Jess's findings? I particularly enjoyed that point that you made at the end, that it's not enough just to get the books in the library if it's not actually integrated elsewhere. Did you find any examples of places that had done that, that sort of curriculum first approach?
All of these universities were involved to a greater or lesser degree in the creating of the reading list with faculty. Some of them found that faculty were a little bit more resistant to change. Some of them were finding a great enthusiasm from their faculty about recognizing that they had maybe had some tunnel vision in the past and were actively trying to expand the canon of work that they included in their courses. So
awesome. And I guess this is maybe a related point, but Eva would like to know if there are any faculties in certain disciplines that appeared to be more supportive than others.
Absolutely, yeah. Arts and humanities are much more keen on this work than STEM fields. I didn't find enough hard data to really include that in my presentation, but yeah, anecdotally, arts, humanities, social sciences just are much more focused on this. Sciences tend to not see it as important, whether that is just a sort of institutional culture thing, or if they feel that oh, well, we only tell you things that are true anyway, so why would it matter who says it? I don't know the answer to that question, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something a few of us have said to be the case with STEM. There's one more question I think we've just got time for. George would like to know about why you limited your search for the literature review on the ProQuest collection rather than a sort of broader sweep. Was there any particular reason for that?
That's a good question. So for informal sources, I did pull from a lot of different places, but for my formal sources, I specifically wanted the library literature. I was, had to limit the scope of this project in some way, and I didn't want to get carried away with, what school libraries are doing, what special libraries are doing, what museums are doing. So that was a way. I found that ProQuest's library collection gave me all the information that I was searching for.
Awesome. So it was kind of like delimiting your, I mean, I guess it's master's level research, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm sure UCL are trying to drag you in to do a PhD on it, so you can expand it further.
Yeah,
if I know the PhD lot. Okay, that's great. So we're up to time. So if we could all express our thanks to Jess in the chat, I'm sure we'd all really appreciate that. And thank you very much, Jess. I really enjoyed that. It was really interesting and a great start to day 2 of the conference. So thank you very much, everybody. We do have a break now, so do go and get a cup of tea. And if you're in most of England, it's a beautiful weather today, so do go outside, get a bit of fresh air, and we'll see you back at 11 o'clock for our next session. Thank you very much, everybody.